This is Play-by-Playcast.
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
The podcast about play-by-play guys. For play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Todd Bodette. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Bell in the shotgun. Snap. Blake back to pass. Looking right. Throws end zone right side. It is caught! He caught it! Touchdown Sooners! Touchdown Jalen Saunders!
What a throw.
Sooner magic in Stillwater. Oklahoma leads with 19 seconds to play. Oh, mama!
All right, it's episode number 75 of Play-by-Playcast. Welcome back into the pod, everybody. No intro this week. We're just going to roll right off the top here, mainly because, as a broadcaster in the MAC, we have midweek football now. So I'm in Oklahoma as we record this on a Wednesday. Football Thursday, basketball Friday. We fly out to Oregon for basketball Saturday. So to minimize editing on this week's episode of the pod, let's say hi to Toby Roland.
You are in the throes of it, my man. This is the time of year when everybody's busy, and you've got it double time right now. So it's an honor to be on with you. I have thoroughly enjoyed your podcast. We are 3 to 5 hours from everywhere in the Big 12, so I drive most places, and I consume a lot of podcasts. And I found yours not too long ago, and I've enjoyed many of them. So well done.
Well, this is awesome. We don't usually interact with friends of the pod off the top. Usually it's like after the fact. Oh, wow, that's pretty cool. I've been listening to a couple on in retrospect, but it was neat when I got the email from you that said, hey, I've heard a few, so glad to be on. So glad we can sit and chat. For those that don't know, by the way, Toby is the voice of the Oklahoma Sooners, going on year what now? Is this year 6 or 7?
This is the 7th year. Yeah, we are into year 7.
Tell me about your upbringing with the Sooners, because I know when you got this job, you basically said this was the job. So at what point did you plan out kind of in your life and say, A, I'm going to be a broadcaster, and B, I'm going to be the voice of the Sooners?
My sophomore year in college at Southern Nazarene, which is a local small school here in the Oklahoma City area, I was an accounting major, and I wasn't enjoying it. And I remember a conversation I had with my father in which he said, what would be your dream job? And listen, I grew up, as probably you and a lot of people listening, a giant sports dork. I mean, I consumed everything. I played out entire 64-team NCAA tournaments on the Dr. J goal in my basement and would play triple and quadruple hitters of baseball in my backyard where I'd pitch it to myself and hit it. The greatest thing for me was OU football. And I would listen to John Brooks, who was then the voice of the Sooners, as I was a kid, and act out games. We didn't get to go to many, but I'd act them out in the backyard. I'd be Billy Sims, high-stepping into the end zone. So I grew up a giant Sooner fan, and my dad said, what would be your dream job? And I was like, well, the greatest job any human being could ever have would be to be the play-by-play voice of the Oklahoma Sooners. But that's not going to happen, obviously. So if I could just figure out a way to get, to be in sports broadcasting would be unbelievable. And he encouraged me to do that. The problem was we didn't have a broadcast journalism major at Southern Nazarene. We had a journalism degree, but I had a great professor there who was able to cobble together, knew what I wanted to do, cobble together a curriculum that got me as much experience as possible. You're a Syracuse guy, right? I've heard you with Tony Caridi, a good friend of mine from West Virginia. I mean, you guys, the Syracuse guys and the Missouri guys and the Kansas guys are kind of the Harvard and Yale of this industry. I like to think my path is kind of the equivalent of Jim Furyk's golf swing. It's not classically trained. I just kind of cobbled it together. But she got me an internship at a local TV station. I was on the basketball team at Southern Nazarene, but I was like 4-string point guard. I was terrible, wasn't playing at all. So my senior year, my coach said, if you'll give us the basketball scholarship back that we're wasting on you, basically, we would like you to start a sports information program here, and you can call our games. He knew what I wanted to do. So, awesome. I didn't have to run line drills anymore, and I got to start to learn how to call games and everything that goes into that. good fortune for me was I stayed on after I graduated to be the sports information director, and we started at Southern Nazarene a football and a baseball program. So I had to, learn how to call football and baseball, and did that for 4 or 5 years. And that's where the love blossomed. Once you call your first games, you're like, I can't imagine anything better than doing this. And, the career went the television route for a while, which was fine. I was enjoying that. I was at the CBS affiliate here in Oklahoma City for about a decade, all the while kind of keeping my toe in the play-by-play waters, local high school. Got to know the people at OU, so when they needed a pinch hitter for women's basketball or baseball or softball, I would call a game here or there for them. And eventually the door opened for the sideline guy in 2009, and was fortunate enough to get that, which at the time I thought, this is as close to this is unbelievable. I'm on the OU broadcast, the thing I've always dreamed about being a part of. And after 2 years, after the second year, our longtime play-by-play voice, who's a legend around here, Bob Berry, announced his retirement, and was fortunate enough that they chose to go with the Jim Furyk golf swing.
What's it like when, they always say that you don't want to be the guy that replaces the legend. You want to be the guy that replaces the guy that replaced the legend. What's it like being the guy that replaced the legend and carving out your own niche and kind of gaining that acceptance of Sooner fans who obviously knew who you were because you'd been around, but getting people to look at you in the light you want them to as the new voice of the Sooners?
You're certainly aware of it. I think it was made a lot easier by Bob Berry, who was the previous voice of the Sooners, just embraced me right away and made it extremely easy. But for the first couple of years, you're certainly aware that it has been done a certain way around here for a long time. A quick example, and it sounds simple, but Bob would say touchdown Oklahoma. And I, at least in the early years, would say touchdown Sooners. And that's not a big deal. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but you'd be surprised how many thousands of people that drove crazy. They had heard touchdown Oklahoma their whole life and didn't want to hear it another way.
Was that a conscious decision by you though to say I'm not going to be him in terms of like almost protecting his legacy?
There was I was hired in March and didn't call my first real football game until late August, early September. So there was a long time there of, what am I going to do? How's it going to work? More than that, people asking me things like, what's your touchdown call going to be? What's your catchphrase? All that kind of stuff. So it was probably in my head more than it should have been there early. I didn't want to. That was his call. That was his. I couldn't just copy what he said. So I don't even say that anymore. I don't even say touchdown Sooners anymore. But in the early days, we did. And so it was a little bit of a conscious decision to, out of respect, that's his thing. But a lot of people didn't like it. So there was, the first couple of years, you're just kind of aware. It's been done this way for a long time. To be fair, I would feel the same way. I'm a giant Cincinnati Reds fan. I've listened to Marty Brennaman my whole life. And whoever's next after Marty, it's going to take me a while because I've heard Marty for 40 years now, however long he's been doing it. So I get it. When you've heard Oklahoma Sooner football called the same way for decades, whoever the next voice is, no matter how good he is, it's going to take a while for people's ears to adjust. I'm sure Joe Davis is going through the same thing with the Dodgers, and he is extraordinary. But, it takes a little while to kind of settle in for you to find your voice, your original voice, and for people to accept that as, all right, he's our guy now.
Did you, along the whole way, still kind of keep the end goal of I want to find a way to situate myself to get to the dream job of being the voice of the Sooners? Or, had you kind of resigned yourself to the fact that, hey, I'm in a decade in television, I'm great at it, I'm enjoying it, let's go this route? Or I've had the conversation a couple of times with people recently, too, about, best way to get to the play-by-play job you want is, do you go off to Pocatello and do play-by-play and get good at it, and be that and try to get your way in that way? Or are you the guy that is around something all the time and builds a reputation in a place so that when something comes open, they go, that's our guy? You've been in Oklahoma for a long time. Did you kind of have that thought in your mind that went, hey, listen, if I can be the guy here in Oklahoma. I can set myself up to get to where I ultimately want to be.
I don't know that I put that much thought into it. I think...
just completely...
No, I got what you're saying, but it is so unlikely that voice of the Sooners actually happens. I mean, listen, your job is a great job. Anybody who is in one of our jobs has an unbelievable, living. If it had been Memphis, if it had been Utah, if it had been Ball State, I would have been tickled pink. But the fact that, my favorite team growing up, the team that I revere so much, the broadcast and everything that I revere so much, it's so minuscule unlikely that I better find some other things that in life that I'm going to be happy with. And so I think, I heard your interview, I think with Sean Grandy, who talked about versatility. You just get as good at as many different things as you possibly can, and you never know what doors are going to open for you. So if it's television, if it had been on the anchor desk and that's where my career went, I would have been happy doing that. If it had been in radio and it had been a talk show and that's where my career went, I could have been happy doing that. If I was in the world of sports broadcasting, I would have been happy. But to plan out the path to be the one job that's going to come open once and 300 people are going to want it, you got to kind of have realistic expectations. I do remember when the job came open, telling my wife, we'd only been on the sideline 2 years, still pretty young. There's a lot of bigger names that want this. There's a 99% chance this isn't going to happen, so don't get your hopes too high. But obviously, it has been unbelievable. It's been beyond our wildest dreams. What
was the reaction? I know I think I had read an interview where basically when you got the call, you basically broke down and this was the life goal. And I think you said you called your wife and she just went nuts, right?
It was a long process, and when we finally got that final call, I was alone at home. And the voice on the other end said, we're calling to offer you the job to be the next voice of the Sooners. And, you got to know what that means in my heart. That's Walter Cronkite, that's Kurt Gowdy, that's Bob Berry and John Brooks. And this is a thing that you never really believed would happen. And I bawled like a baby. And I called my wife, and she was at a Mexican restaurant with some friends. And she screamed, but this was supposed to be all top secret, so we couldn't tell anybody for 4 or 5 days till the press conference. That was so hard to sit on for that long.
What's wrong? Nothing at all. Everything's fine.
But it was emotional, and it still is. It's been 7 years, but it's only been 7 years. In this business, there's a lot of guys that have been doing it for 30, 40 years. So I'm still a newbie, and it's still, when I retell the story, I can still feel the emotions.
I'm in a position where I replaced a guy that was 56 years at Ball State. There's obvious inherent pressure that comes along with that, and Maury Manning was great in many ways. But you just sat here and rattled off the guys that came before you. And you don't even have to be a sports fan to know Kurt Gowdy, Walter Cronkite, names that resonate with anybody and everybody. What was the pressure like when you first assumed that role, and maybe even now to, hey, I want to, or I've got to not only live up to the Sooner name that I've been so connected with my whole life, but names of giants in this industry that came before me?
I think for about a year I felt pressure, and now there's just kind of a reverence. I talk about the chair a lot and having reverence for the chair that you get to sit in, and the men who at the University of Oklahoma who have sat in that chair. And I don't feel pressure now. I just want him to be proud. I just want him to feel like, all right, he's acceptably carrying the baton, And I could never be Walter Cronkite or Kurt Gowdy or John Brooks or Bob Berry. There's no way I can. But it took me for about a year to stop trying to. I got to be as good as those guys. And I heard a Vin Scully story one day talking about, I think it was Red that got onto him in his first year in Brooklyn about stop trying to be somebody else, just be yourself. Nobody else can be a Vin Scully. I butchered the story, but it's to that effect. And that gave me some peace. I was like, you know what? I'm a pretty good Toby Roland. If I can just go be myself, I know how to call a game, and let's hope that Oklahoma Sooner fans embrace me. And since that moment forward, I've had a pretty good peace about it. I don't feel pressure. I know how big of a deal it is to be the voice of the Oklahoma Sooners, and I hold that in the highest regard, and I protect that, and then you just go try to do the best job you can every game you call.
What's your job entail? Because it's unique in that you guys have the Sooner Sports Network, which not everybody has, and you produce a lot of content as yourselves. What are the types of things that are required of you or that you get to do that are maybe a little bit different, fun, unique to this job?
We do have a TV network on campus, which is an unbelievable experience. Joe Castiglione, our athletic director, had the foresight, even before the Longhorn Network came along, to create this, and it's really become a trendsetter in college sports. We produce a multitude of shows every week. I'm not involved in all of them, but for example, right now I will host a press conference show on Mondays, co-host that for Lincoln Riley's press conference. Tuesdays we do a spotlight show, which is a half-hour feature on kind of the athletic department as a whole. And then we broadcast for radio and television a simulcast on Tuesday nights from a local barbecue restaurant, a 1-hour show we call The Huddle with Teddy Lehman, who was a Butkus Award-winning linebacker here, and then the Lincoln Riley Show. So we'll host his call-in show, although it's tweets now, every Tuesday from there.
I heard Bob Stoops doesn't necessarily like call-ins if you don't tell him ahead of time.
We actually, I hosted Bob's show for a while, and we stopped taking calls one night, and we haven't ever since because it went bad, but that was a funny night. And then, during basketball season, obviously, it's basketball shows and stuff. But there are some extra responsibilities on the television side of things, and sometimes it's calling games. There'll be women's basketball games or softball games or soccer games, rowing.
You've called rowing?
I've called rowing.
How do you call rowing?
Stroke, stroke, stroke. Yeah, it looks like they're out in front. You have like everything else, you have a really good color analyst that knows what they're talking about.
Fair.
That's the key to all good play-by-play. But we have all the Olympic sports that we try to shine the spotlight on, because football's got it. I mean, they don't need us. They've got ESPN and Fox, and so does basketball. But all the other sports that we try to bring a little more of a spotlight to, we jump in and help out with that as well.
Does that make it more fun for you than just being the football, basketball guy?
Yeah. I think that anytime you can challenge your versatility, I mean, anytime you get thrown something new, the initial thought is, I've never done that before. Ask somebody else. And then you kind of bow up and go, shoot, I can do that. If somebody else can do that, I can do that. So you study up on how do you do a gymnastics meet, or how do you call a rowing or whatever. And then once you've done it, and you can add it to your resume. Hey, if the Olympics ever need an extra rowing announcer, I've got it on the resume somewhere. So, yeah, it's fun. It can be stressful at times when you're in the middle of a week like you are right now, and something extra gets thrown on your plate, but we're fortunate that we have the Sooner Sports Network because it's an amazing entity.
Not that, we all like to talk about sports, and this is what we enjoy doing, so more of it is, I don't want to say never ever a bad thing, but you do so much, and you cover so many different things, and I guess you could probably ask the same thing to people that are at Texas with Longhorn Network and things of that nature. How does it test you in terms of coming up with new things to say or different ways to say old things, so that you don't feel like you're doing, the press conference show and talking about one thing and then hammering it again when you're doing the call-in show or the tweet-in show with Lincoln Riley, and then hammering it again when you're talking to him pregame, and keeping things fresh with the amount of coverage that you get involved in?
It's a great question. I think there's a fine line between, there's a comfort, especially I think with the hometown college broadcast, of your guy who says the things you like to hear every week. When I was growing up, it was John Brooks, and he always said Jiminy Christmas when there was a big play. And we all looked forward to hearing Jiminy Christmas. And, every broadcaster's got this or that with football or basketball that is kind of their deal, and their fan base, they attach themselves to it. But there's a fine line between that and falling into a rut of always saying the same thing over and over again. So I think that you've got to listen to yourself, especially early on. You've got to go back and listen to recordings and see if you fall into a rut, or if you have a crutch word that you repeat every time there's a handoff, or anytime the ball goes to the left corner. Do you always call it the corner, or can you vary your delivery? I, like a lot of us in this business, I kind of carry a list of verbs with me at all times. And you never know when you're going to hear a word. Maybe it's one of your kids' cartoons, or maybe it's on a billboard or on a menu somewhere where you say, that would be a good way to describe someone driving to the basket or Rodney Anderson hitting the hole. And you kind of keep that list, and before a game or at halftime you look at it and you think, maybe I could work in something new tonight. But you don't want to stray from what makes you you. So I think it's a fine line between giving people kind of the broadcast that they've grown to be comfortable with, the lexicon that they've grown to be comfortable with, and not being repetitive every night.
Same thing apply, I guess, when it comes to question asking and things like that, because I'm sure you interact with coaches multiple times per week for multiple different audiences, and at some level are getting not so many multiple different answers. Right. Where's the challenge in that for you?
The challenge is an individual challenge from coach to coach. The personality of a coach dictates an interview more than anything else. Now, you can try to help it. You can try to get into some interesting topics that will bring personalities out of coach, or a good story or whatever. But, the coach is the dictator of how that's going to go. But it's funny how wildly different personalities can be. I mean, Bob Stoops and Lincoln Riley are 180 degrees different personality-wise. And so that show on Tuesday nights with Lincoln Riley is an entirely different show than it is with Bob Stoops. Both of them very good, but entirely different feel to it. Our baseball coach right now, Skip Johnson, good old country boy who would just as soon be sitting in a deer blind as doing anything else in the world. And he talks like that. He tells you good old country stories about killing possums and all that kind of stuff. And the interviews are awesome. Sherry Cole right now is certainly one of the most recognizable faces in all of women's basketball. And you could ask her the worst question in the world, and she will turn it into a Beethoven symphony. You don't have to be a good question asker. With Bob Stoops, you did. If you ask Bob a bad question, he would tell you to your face with the cameras rolling, "Come on now, Toby, that's not a good question." He was the best final exam you could have for how to be a good interviewer.
How'd he make you better?
He sharpens you. I would think about that show from the moment the football game ended on Saturday until Tuesday night. And I would be keeping a list of possible questions in my phone. And I would watch his press conference after a game, and then he would have another press conference. He'd have a TV show on Sunday and another press conference on Monday, and he'd have another media availability after practice on Tuesday. All of this before I got to him Tuesday night. And I would, every question in the world has been asked.
That's where it comes back to how do you make it different, too, yeah.
And the one thing he doesn't suffer is answering the same question over again. So I've got him for 60 minutes. He's already been asked 250 questions since the football game. So what in the world are we going to do? So, it would test you into put a lot of thought in it, be creative. What can we talk about maybe in Youngstown, Ohio, when he was growing up that people haven't heard before? What about the opponent this week? Are there some personal connections that Bob has that people hasn't heard before? Maybe it's a question that somebody asked at a press conference and there was a really good follow-up to that and they didn't follow it up, and now I can go pursue that a little bit more. And what you do right here, I think, is what that show is. It is a relaxed, sit-down podcast interview session. And if you can engage him or anybody in a conversation, not just a list of questions, let's have a conversation. He answers that, tell me more about this, feed off of each other, then you can hopefully get something interesting out of that.
I heard an interview you did where you talked about emceeing events and talked about emceeing them with Bob. And he had a routine where, and this is how much time you had, and here's what I want you to ask me, here's what don't ask me. Would you do that for radio-type interviews as well? And I guess there's a push and pull there because sometimes you have to ask tough questions, but at the same time, could you go to a guy like that in advance and almost kind of, hey, Bob, this is where I want to go with this, just so you're aware ahead of time, or do you have anything you want me to hit you with?
I'll do that with all of our coaches. I'm in a different role than the editor at the Oklahoman or someone at a local news station. I'm on their team.
You're all getting paid by the same people, yeah.
I'm their guy. I'm on their team. And so before a show or before a session, I will, if we have a caravan or whatever we're doing, I'll go to Lon Kruger or Sherry Cole or Bob Stoops or Lincoln Riley and say, is there anything you want me to ask you tonight? Because maybe they've got an agenda that they want to, or maybe they've got some news that they want to break that night and I wouldn't know otherwise. Can I tee you up for a point you'd like to make tonight? And then is there anything you don't want me to ask you? Almost always the answer to that was no, or is no. On a rare occasion, I remember that, I think it was maybe the Joe Mixon situation or something. Or he was like, we've talked enough about this. Let's just make sure we don't talk about that tonight. So I get it. I mean, we're on the same team. So I think that's just a courtesy. And sometimes it's for my benefit. More often than not, it's for my benefit because they're going to bring me something I wouldn't know otherwise. Sherry may say, oh, yeah, this is going on. Would you ask me about it? I didn't know about it. And so it leads to some great content.
How do you deal with controversial situations like that, like a Joe Mixon situation? Because obviously, we all know where the bread is buttered and you're all on the same team, but at the same time, you want to at least, even if it's in a cursory fashion, address that. Or even if it comes down to Baker in the offseason goes through what he went through and how you address that as the outlet of Oklahoma. What are the ways that you touch on touchy issues, but if you don't say anything, people are going to go, well, he's a homer.
I've got two different roles. In my role as the voice of the Sooners, when it comes to something like that, I just tell the truth and I present the facts. That's all you can do. It is not my job to give an opinion on the situation that we're going through. I'm going to tell you whether he got a first down, whether the pass was completed. By the way, there's a lot going on with him this week. You guys have read the papers and know the news media, and here's what's going on. It's pretty easy. I mean, it's not my job to get into that. Now, I also host a radio show in town where people expect a little more in the opinion area. And it's a morning show. We have a lot of fun. We're not necessarily throwing out hard opinions on a daily basis, but from time to time, we'll have opinions on things. And I told my audience up front when I got this job, listen, I got this job. You know what that means. I'm not going to come on my radio show and ask for OU coaches to be fired. I'm not going to come on my radio show and talk about controversial things necessarily going on at the University of Oklahoma Athletics Department and take really strong opinions. There are 17 other shows in town that will. And if that's your thing, I encourage you to seek them out. But on my show, we're going to get great interviews. We're going to get great access at OU. And hopefully we're going to entertain you on a daily basis. And anytime something like that comes up and somebody tries to steer me that direction, I just kind of lay down the ground rules of the show again. And it's worked. I'm sure some people don't like that, who have come to expect sports radio to sound a certain way. But on the other hand, I think our show is unique and brings this market something that nobody else can because of the access I have in my position. So I'm comfortable with it. Joe Castiglione, our athletic director, is comfortable with it. I've never heard from any of our coaches that are uncomfortable with it, so it's worked.
Well, and this may sound like puff PC too, but I think it probably gives you a more, I don't want to use wholesome puff PC way, but it probably gives you a more wholesome radio show where you call in and you can learn, or you listen and you can learn something, and it's not the bombastic, this guy needs to go get fired. If you listen to, you guys, maybe you find out why things are the way they are and take a different understanding of how things are trying to get turned in the right direction, if that was your opinion.
I hope so. And I don't prevent my callers from doing that. If the callers want to call in and voice their opinion, there have been a lot of opinions on our defense this year on my radio show. It's a forum for you. If you want to call in and complain about something, I have no qualms with that at all. Just know I'm probably not going to participate in it most of the time. So I think it's worked. It's been a good formula. I don't know that there was necessarily a script laid out or a formula as to how that was supposed to work. I know when I got the OU job, there was some talk, are they going to keep letting him do the talk show? And they did. They put faith in me to we're going to let you keep doing the talk show, and hopefully it's worked out okay.
How do you address issues like that? And let's maybe take that to a game broadcast. Let's talk about Oklahoma's defense. If you're giving up a lot of yards, and I guess we can use Bedlam as an example, but at the same time, you're scoring enough to keep up with it, so it's less of an issue. But if I can flip that onto a team like Ball State this year, who's given up 50 points in 5 straight weeks, and they're... I look at Rich, my color guy, all the time, and I'm like, all right, Rich, how are we gonna do this one this week? How do you attack that on air? If there's something that's happening in front of you that's not great, saying it the right way and conveying the message that is both true and in not the harshest of terms.
Tell the truth. I mean, that's if the defense is not playing well, I say, defense is not playing well tonight. It's a bad game. Give them the stats. Lay it out. OU football fans are smart. I mean, they've been around this a long time, and they expect you to be honest with them. And if you tried to sugarcoat things, then you're going to lose respect pretty quick around here. I think, a lot of talk in our industry about homers, a homer broadcast, especially with a hometown college broadcast. I think necessarily where that comes into play is not being more excited when your team scores a touchdown than when the other team scores a touchdown. That's natural. That's what the fans want. That's why they're listening to you rather than somebody else. Where that comes in is if you're dishonest with your listeners. And you can't do that. If you are dishonest with your listeners as to what is happening in a game in front of you, then they're not going to listen to you or they're not going to watch you. That's being a homer as far as I'm concerned. So sometimes honesty is hard. Sometimes you have a terrible game and you just got to lay it out and say, this is a terrible performance tonight. And I think, though, by doing that, you gain some credit and some respect with your listeners in that if Toby's telling me they're playing great tonight, they're playing great tonight because he would be honest with me if they weren't.
Favorite moments for you? There was an article that listed, I think, your top 5 at this point, and it had Samaje Perine's FBS record rushing day in there. And it mentioned the fact that you kind of had a feel at some point, like, when he breaks it, I've got to have an idea of what I'm going to say because this is something that's going to get played over and over. When you're in a game, like, at what point did you stop and think, not only is he having a great night, but this is a historic one, and I should probably look up what the rushing record is in FBS college football and then start to think about, okay, I kind of want to have some sort of idea of where I'm going with this when it happens.
That was a rarity. As you know, most of the big moments that tend to live are spontaneous. Buddy hitting a 3 at the buzzer. A Baker scramble in which he evades 14 rushers and finds a guy in the back of the end zone. You don't know that's happening. You just takes a snap and you hang on for dear life.
Plants a flag at midfield.
Yeah, who knew that was going to happen? But that you saw coming. That you, as the day went along, you're right. At halftime, he's got how many ever 200 and how many ever yards at halftime, and I got a statistician in the booth with me. I was like, what's the record? What are we? Well, it had been set like the week before.
It was. And
so we kind of saw if he's on pace here, and then it became clear in the third quarter. Not only is he getting there, he might get there by the end of the third quarter. So you had an hour to think we may see the greatest rushing performance in college football history today. Funny thing about that was it was Kansas. There was absolutely no hype. It was a rainy day. There were no fans. We were delayed before kickoff because of a storm. It was one of those days where you wake up and you're not all that fired up about it. I mean, we love our jobs, but not every day is OU Texas, And all of a sudden we have this historic performance unfolding in front of us. And you can't help but think in your mind, I'm not a guy who likes to plan things out. I think that if you do that, and I know a lot of the guys you've talked to agree with this, if you do that, it almost inevitably sounds corny. There's a few things in my career I've tried to think of in advance, and then when I drop them in the broadcast, I'm like, that was dumb. Why did I do that? But this was an occasion where you're like, he's about to have the greatest day in college football rushing history. There's going to be a call. There's going to be a moment. Number one, I hope it's obvious. I hope it's not he needs 12 yards and he's tackled 11 and a half yards. There's a measurement. He got it. You want it to be.
And he loses 3 on the next carry and then gets it again.
You want it to be clearly that's the record. And then what am I going to say? I think that naturally crosses everybody's mind. And you kind of have that wrestling in your mind. Don't plan it out. Just trust yourself. You'll say the right thing at the right time. And, that's kind of what ultimately happened is I'll just trust it. We'll see what happens, and we'll see what comes flying out. And that takes, as you know, that takes a long time to get to as a broadcaster, though, to trust yourself that when a big moment happens, you're going to say the right thing. Because if you don't, then it ends up on blogs or SportsCenter or whatever, and there's no taking it back at that point.
What's broadcasting a Final Four like at the stage that they are at now, where you're at such large venues and it's such a big deal?
It was certainly, of everything I've got an opportunity to do, and I include Sugar Bowls and Big 12 championships and that moment you were talking about, it's probably the greatest thrill that I've had in my 7 years, just because of, I was a basketball player and what the Final Four, what college basketball means to me. And that season was magical for us. So many unbelievable moments that Buddy and that team provided. And for them to get to the Final Four, I was sitting in the back of the team plane. We were flying from Anaheim after the Elite Eight game back to Oklahoma. And Ryan Spangler, our big man on that team, was on the aisle across from me. And I was sleeping. Everybody was sleeping on the plane. And I feel this tap on my shoulder. And I look over, and it's Spangler. And he goes, dude, we're going to the Final Four. And I was like, he woke me up because he was so excited. Well, that's what it was. I mean, you kind of have this moment where you walk in like Hoosiers, and you look around, and you're like, holy cow, the goal's 10 feet high, and it's the Final Four. Now, we got crushed. We got ran out of the gym, so it was fun for about 10 minutes into the game, and then Villanova absolutely had their way with us. But it was a great experience. I hope we get to do it again someday.
What's that atmosphere like, though, just from a broadcaster? And, where were you? How hard is it to, I don't know, what's the environment like that you're working in on a night like that?
I was worried about where they put the radio guys at a Final Four, because there's rows and rows of media, and some of them are in the upper deck.
You're in the auxiliary football press box, yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I've never been there before. And I could never get an answer from anybody on that until game night when they put out the placards. And so I walk into the arena on game night, and I'm eagerly. I was assuming we were in the second row, because some of those big events you're kind of behind the TV guys a little bit. And we were on the front row at the free throw line. And I remember how excited I was that, hey, this is legit. We're on the front row here. So the atmosphere is different. All of the pageantry that goes into it is a little different from a pregame standpoint. Instead of 30 minutes, I think we did 2 hours that night. And
are you down low too? Because was the court elevated?
Court's elevated, so it's it's chin level. So you're right at everybody's high tops.
So everybody looks huge.
Oh yeah. But it was fun. It was a great experience. You're surrounded by the who's who of broadcasting. There's Jim Nantz and Bill Raftery and everybody. I mean, there's everybody. So it was a great experience. I really, really hope we get to do it again.
I want to ask you here, before we get too far down the rabbit hole, what we talked about right when we sat down, because I didn't even think about it. And then just the way you talked about it, I thought was really interesting. I had mentioned going to see the Oklahoma City Memorial this morning, and you talked about being an intern in television when that had happened, and the fact that you were interning for national networks at that time, too, because of the way that everything happened. So I'm curious about that, too, because that's not something... Not everybody on this podcast says I got to be in the same car as Dan Rather on a regular basis. So from a journalistic standpoint, what was it like to be in the center of all of that?
It was horrific and exhilarating, if that makes any sense. And I hope people understand that I mean this with the utmost respect. I was an intern at the CBS affiliate here in 1994-95 in the sports department, and the Murrah building bombing took place in April of 95. And I got called in that morning after it had happened to go to the scene with our sports reporter, everybody obviously is in news on that day. Everybody goes into news mode, and he's going to go to a local church where families are trying to find missing people. And so he needs help, and so I go in to help him. And, you know, it was the worst things I've ever seen in my life. And what those people were going through and the things I saw that day, I'll never be able to erase. But what happened from a professional standpoint out of that is CBS National came to town, obviously, as CNN did and everybody on the globe did, and they moved into half of our building for 2 or 3 months. I mean, they were there for a long time, and 48 hours and 60 minutes were all working out of our building, and they needed help. They needed people who knew how to get places. They didn't know Oklahoma City. And so, you know, us interns volunteered to intern for them, and 2 days a week I'd go in to sports, and there was no sports. I mean, there was just no sports around here for a while. Nobody cared about games, rightfully so. And 1 or 2 days a week I'd go help them out. And it was mostly driving. It was mostly, we've got a lead that whoever did this may be at this hotel. Can you get us to this hotel? And that was creepy.
Can you drive me to the place of a psycho killer?
Yeah, no, there was some of that going on. It was like 2 a.m, and we need to go check out a lead. I remember one time a guy was meeting with a secret informant. One of the reporters was meeting with a secret, whoever his source was, that knew who had done this at a Denny's. And he needed me to drive him to that Denny's, one of the 60 Minutes reporters. And so I drive him to the Denny's, and we get there, and I start to get out and go in, and he goes, no, you're staying here. And so I stay in the car. He goes into the Denny's. I don't have any idea who he talks to, but I'm sitting there going, what am I doing? Like,
This is where the shooting starts in a spy movie.
Yeah, exactly. So that was my life for a couple of months, maybe longer than that. And you know, the professional experience that came out of it was tremendous. Just to get to see the best in the craft do their job, to watch a 48 hours piece or a 60 minutes piece get put together from lead to editing to story writing till it airs, and to say, yeah, I drove him to that place. I didn't do anything, but I drove him to that place, you know, was, for a college kid, very fulfilling. And I think, you know, it made me even more interested in the world of television after that, and storytelling, which I think has been something that I've really tried to do both in television and with the University of Oklahoma. Is if you can creatively tell stories and capture people's imagination with words, then that's a powerful thing.
This might be a hard one, but can you remember back? Is there something from all that you learned about storytelling, or the way that at that level things get put together that maybe stuck with you and you carried with you and said, oh, I like that. That was interesting.
I think that this is a large part of it. Was you can move people with words. I mean, you can really move people. Sometimes it is gut-wrenching. Sometimes it is exhilarating. We do something called a scene setter here before every game, where we kind of, for a minute and a half or 2.5 minutes, we set the scene for what does this game mean tonight. And it plays right before kickoff at Owen Field. After the coin flip before kickoff, they play it on the Jumbotron. And the point is, we are setting the final stage before kickoff tonight, and when it ends, the place should be in a roar. And the power of words and the ability to move people to that is fascinating and very attractive to me. Now, they were doing it with really hard, gut-wrenching, emotional, sad stories. But just the fact that if you write something really well, it can have an impact on people's lives. And those people were the best in their craft. So I think that was maybe the biggest lasting impression I took away from that.
I'm going to check my notes here just to make sure I don't stop recording and then go, oh boy, make sure I got through everything. Oh, this is interesting. Just from its own separate, completely different. But I'd read at some point where you had opportunities when the Thunder came to town. As a guy that wanted to get into play-by-play, what kept you on the track? And I guess that kind of brings us full circle to where we started. What kept you on the track that you were on versus saying like, hey, let me go try something and try my hand with an NBA team?
The threat of a lawsuit.
Oh, well, that's a phenomenal threat. Yeah.
I was prevented from doing it. When the Thunder came to town in 2008, I was still at the TV station. It was pre-OU, and they called and asked if I would be the sideline guy. And, holy cow. First off, the NBA's coming to Oklahoma City was something that was unfathomable to any of us around here. And now we had a chance to travel the globe with an NBA team. The schedule was going to be better for a family. A 10 p.m. or at a local television station, if you're doing the 10 o'clock news, that is a hard life schedule-wise. And so this was going to be better for my family. It was financially going to be significantly better. And, we had gotten the break of a lifetime, we thought at the time there. But I had 3 years left on my contract at my TV station and 1 year left on my contract at my radio station. So I went to my TV station and told them what was going on, and they were thrilled for me. They were like, you got to do this. We'll let you out of your contract. Way to go. And I went to my radio station, and they didn't have the same reaction.
I figured it would be the other way around.
Yeah, I know. And we talked about it, and they weren't budging, and I finally, I don't want to get too much into the legalese, but I finally decided I'm doing it anyway because this is going to be television and that's radio and the non-compete doesn't apply. And, we had all kinds of stuff. So I'm in the car driving to sign the contract when I get a phone call from the Thunder saying that, there's lawsuits being threatened, and they had just come out of the Seattle lawsuit situation, and I wasn't worth that. They wanted me to be their sideline guy, but not that bad. And so the rug got pulled out from under us, and it was devastating. It was really, really hard. It was hard on our family. It was hard on my wife and I and everything. Obviously, the relationship with the radio station was rocky for a while. But, I'm a Christian, and I believe that when God closes a door, he opens a window. And little did I know the window that he had in store for us, for our family, about 2 years later. And thank God it worked out the way that it did, because not that there's anything wrong with working for the Thunder. I enjoy Thunder basketball as much as anybody. But being the play-by-play voice at the University of Oklahoma for this kid who grew up in Oklahoma, an Oklahoma Sooner fan, is the greatest job in the world, and it wouldn't have happened if that had worked out. So it was a blessing in disguise.
Toby, how do people find you if they want to follow you on social media or listen to the Sooners?
Well, I am on Twitter at TROOU. I don't do the Facebook thing or anything, but I do have a Twitter account if people would like to follow that. And all of our broadcasts are on TuneIn Radio. I think you guys do your games on TuneIn, don't you? Yeah. So you can, worldwide, you can listen to all of our games on TuneIn or online streaming, whatever. You can find Sooner football out there.
Toby, I appreciate it. This was fun. So thank you for veering out of the way before a game and stopping by the hotel and sharing some knowledge.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Now, we got to go be competitors against each other tonight.
That's true.
We got to put this friendliness aside and play a basketball game.
Well, this is my first time ever to Oklahoma, and you used to live in Indiana, so I think Indiana wins this one.
Well, if we were playing Indiana, I'd be worried about that.
Wow.
No, I'm just kidding.
Just for that, it's going to be a game with the under 4.
No, I was telling you before we started this, I grew up going to some Ball State games because when I lived in Newcastle, Indiana for a while, that's when Rick Majerus was at Ball State. And so I'm very fond of Muncie and of Ball State University and of your basketball programs. So anyway, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
That's Toby Roland joining us, voice of the Oklahoma Sooners. We'll hit the music here, and this will be the outro as well. One contained podcast today. It's Play-by-Playcast. We're back next week with episode 76. See you.
And that will do it from St. Louis, where the score is inconclusive.